There's a house at the end of a dead road that most people pretend not to notice anymore. It was built in 1998, large, custom-designed, surrounded by tall pine trees that seem to swallow sound. It isn't old enough to feel historic, and it isn't modern enough to feel impressive. It sits in that quiet middle ground, comfortable, private, expensive without being flashy. A long gravel driveway curves through the trees before revealing the structure, 2 stories tall, with wide windows and a covered front porch that wraps halfway around the house. During the day, it looks normal. At night, it feels different. The family who lived there moved in during the early 2000s. Neighbors described them as quiet but friendly. No loud parties. No police visits. No strange behavior. Just a normal household tucked away in a private patch of land. Then in 2016, they stopped being seen. At first, no one thought much of it. The property was secluded. It wasn't unusual for weeks to pass without spotting anyone outside. The driveway was long, and trees shielded most activity from view. Maybe they were traveling. Maybe they worked unusual hours. Maybe they preferred privacy. But then something small began to stand out. Every evening, just after sunset, a single light turned on upstairs. Not the porch lights. Not the living room. Just one, the hallway light on the second floor. It glowed faintly through the tall front window, a warm yellow square in the dark silhouette of the house. And every morning, it was off again. Same pattern. Same timing. For weeks. Then months. Meanwhile, the mailbox began to overflow. Packages were delivered and left untouched on the porch. Flyers collected beneath the front door. In winter, snow covered the driveway completely, smooth and undisturbed, no tire tracks cutting through it. Yet the hallway light continued turning on at sunset. Eventually, curiosity shifted into concern. When authorities were contacted to perform a welfare check, they found no signs of forced entry. The front door was locked. Windows were sealed. The security system panel inside the garage was intact, but disarmed. Inside, the air was still. The living room looked staged, a couch positioned neatly across from a flat-screen television, throw blankets folded carefully over the backrest. A coffee table sat centered on a rug, free of clutter. Curtains hung evenly, slightly faded from years of sun exposure. The kitchen counters were spotless. A decorative bowl of artificial fruit rested on the island. Cabinets were closed. The refrigerator, however, was empty. No fresh food. No expired items. No condiments. Just clean shelves. Upstairs, the bedrooms were tidy. Beds made. Closets organized. Dressers empty. No personal electronics. No charging cables. No scattered shoes or forgotten laundry. It was as if someone had packed their lives into boxes, but left the furniture behind. The bathrooms were stripped of toothbrushes, hair products, medication. Even the medicine cabinet was empty. There were no signs of struggle. No broken glass. No stains. No obvious evidence that something violent had occurred. It didn't look abandoned in a hurry. It looked prepared. And yet something was off. Because despite the absence of personal belongings, the house still felt inhabited. Not physically, but emotionally. There was no thick dust layer coating surfaces. No spider webs overtaking corners. The air didn't carry the stale heaviness of long-term decay. It felt paused, not deteriorating. And then there was the upstairs hallway light. It was connected to a simple wall switch. No smart automation. No motion sensors. No programmable timers. Just a basic manual toggle switch mounted beside the stairwell. Electricians inspected the wiring thoroughly. They checked for cross circuits, voltage irregularities, faulty relays. Nothing unusual was found. The switch worked normally when flipped manually. When investigators shut off the breaker controlling that section of the house, the light stayed off. Until the following evening. Just after sunset, it turned on again. Soft. Steady. Not flickering. Not buzzing. Just glowing. The breaker panel had not been tampered with. No signs of entry were found. The doors remained locked. At that point, theories shifted toward power irregularities, maybe an external surge, maybe an unusual grid behavior. But the power company confirmed something stranger. The electricity bill had been paid on time every single month since 2016. Automatically, from an account that no longer had active occupants tied to it. The names previously listed as residents had been legally removed from the property records. The house had not been resold. It had not been foreclosed. Ownership details were strangely quiet, like a gap in paperwork. Yet the payments continued. Precise. On schedule. For years. Inside the house, daylight revealed more subtle details. In the upstairs study, a desk sat near a window overlooking the trees. A single chair was pulled slightly back, as if someone had just stood up from it. On the desk rested a notebook. Open. The first page was blank. But when light hit it at the right angle, faint indentations were visible, impressions of writing that had once pressed hard enough to leave marks on the page beneath. Whatever had been written there was gone. Not torn out. Not scribbled through. Simply removed. The indentation remained like a memory the paper refused to forget. No pens were nearby. No discarded drafts. Just that silent mark. Investigators found no indication that anyone had entered the property since the family disappeared from public view. No broken locks. No disturbed soil around windows. The alarm system logs showed no recent activity. After the inspection, the house was locked again. The breaker was switched off entirely. The power was scheduled to be cut. For a short period, the property went dark. But neighbors still report that faint hallway glow. Not every night, but often enough. Always near sunset. Never accompanied by movement. Never by shadows. Just light. From the same window. Some nights, the glow feels brighter. Other nights, it's barely noticeable. But it's there. The pine trees surrounding the property sway quietly in the wind. The gravel driveway remains untouched. Leaves gather season after season along the edges of the porch. The house does not look vandalized. It does not look destroyed. It looks maintained by something unseen. And that is what unsettles people the most. Because abandoned houses decay loudly. They collapse. They invite intrusion. They advertise neglect. This one does not. It waits. Silent during the day. Watching at night. As if someone, somewhere, still wants it to feel occupied. And that single hallway light, glowing in an otherwise empty house, has become the only sign that whatever story ended here may not be fully finished. And that's where everything begins. The first few years after 2016 were filled with quiet theories. Most of them practical. Financial trouble. Voluntary relocation. Witness protection. Private family matter. All reasonable. All possible. But reasonable explanations start to weaken when time keeps passing and the pattern doesn't change. The hallway light continued its rhythm. Sunset. On. Morning. Off. Not always every night, but often enough to prevent dismissal. Neighbors began recording it. Phone cameras pointed through trees. Timestamps compared. Over several months, a rough consistency formed. The light activated within a small window of time, usually within 15 minutes before or after sunset. That detail bothered people, because sunset shifts gradually through the seasons. Earlier in winter, later in summer. And yet the light seemed aware of that. Adjusting with it. If it had been wired to a timer, it would have stayed fixed to a clock. But this light followed the sun. Electricians returned. This time more thorough. They removed the switch plate, examined the wiring inside the walls, checked for hidden automation modules. Nothing. The switch was old-fashioned. Mechanical. Simple. The breaker panel showed no unexplained resets. The smart meter outside showed minor but consistent energy draw, enough to power a single light fixture. That meant electricity was flowing. But the main breaker had been turned off months earlier. And when it was turned off again under observation, the light still returned the next evening. At that point, power company technicians conducted a full inspection of the exterior lines. No illegal tapping. No secondary feed. No backup generator on site. The house was supposed to be electrically dead. Yet the meter registered usage. Small. Precise. Predictable. The interior began to feel less like a preserved home and more like a system. In the study, investigators revisited the notebook. Under angled lighting, they tried graphite shading to reveal the indentation of whatever had once been written on the first page. The marks were fragmented. Partial curves. Straight lines. Repeated vertical strokes. It wasn't enough to form complete words, but it was enough to suggest the writer had pressed hard. Urgently. As if the act of writing mattered more than the message itself. The indentation did not resemble a shopping list or casual note. The strokes were too heavy, too deliberate. And then there was something else. In the upstairs hallway, directly beneath the light that kept turning on, the carpet showed a faint compression pattern. A narrow line in the fibers, slightly darker than the rest. Not fresh, not new, but repeated, as if someone had stood in the same place frequently, right below the fixture, looking up, or waiting. Infrared scans found no residual body heat patterns, of course. Years had passed, but the consistency of that worn patch added another layer. The house didn't look lived in, but it didn't look untouched either. Outside, seasons kept cycling. Pine needles blanketed the yard. Rain washed against the windows. Snow built up along the edges of the porch each winter. No footprints ever crossed the driveway after storms. And yet the light remained disciplined. Sunset. On. Morning. Off. In 2021, a journalist attempted to trace the ownership records more aggressively. Public documents showed that the property had never officially transferred hands after 2016. The mortgage had been quietly settled. Property taxes were paid irregularly for several years, then abruptly stopped. But the house was never auctioned, never listed, never seized. It sat in a strange legal limbo, technically owned, but with no visible owner attached to it in updated records. When attempts were made to contact the former residents through previous addresses, the trail dissolved. No forwarding information, no active social media presence, no recent employment records. It was as if their public identity stopped at the same time the hallway light began its routine. In 2023, a small team conducted an overnight observation from a distance. Cameras positioned through tree cover. Thermal imaging directed at the second floor. At sunset, the hallway light illuminated right on schedule. Thermal cameras detected no heat signatures inside the home. No body movement. No shifting temperature indicating someone flipping a switch. Just illumination. And something else. For a brief window, less than 30 seconds, a slight shadow crossed the far wall inside the hallway. Not shaped like a person. Not defined. More like a distortion in brightness. Then gone. Reviewing the footage frame by frame yielded nothing conclusive. It could have been camera noise. A branch shifting in front of the window. A trick of angle and exposure. But it was enough to amplify speculation. Some began suggesting solar interference. Perhaps the angle of the setting sun hitting a reflective surface inside, creating the illusion of activation. But that theory failed when cloud-covered evenings still produced the glow. Others leaned toward concealed technology, a hidden smart system installed before departure. But no network signals were detected. No wireless signals emitted from within the property. Eventually, curiosity gave way to fatigue. The house became less of an active investigation and more of a local myth. Teenagers dared each other to approach the porch at night. None claimed to see movement. None reported sound. Just that steady hallway glow. The most unsettling detail, however, wasn't the light itself. It was the precision. Because on nights when sunset was obscured by storm clouds, when darkness fell earlier than usual, the light did not respond to the darkness. It responded to the astronomical sunset time, the exact calculated moment the sun crossed the horizon. Not when the sky looked dark, when the sun technically set. That meant whatever controlled it wasn't reacting to visible light. It was reacting to time. And time alone. Inside the house, dust has finally begun to thicken. Surfaces show signs of slow neglect. Paint edges have started to crack slightly in corners. But the structure remains solid. Windows unbroken. Locks intact. It feels less like abandonment and more like containment. As if the house is holding something in place. Not a person, not a presence, but a pattern, a routine, a final instruction left behind. Sunset. On. Morning. Off. No variation beyond that. No escalation. No attempt at communication. Just repetition. Some say the family programmed it as a deterrent, a way to make the house appear occupied. A common trick used to discourage trespassers. If that's true, it worked. Because despite years passing, very few people have dared to step inside after dark. Not because of ghosts. Not because of horror. But because something about the discipline of that light feels intentional. Controlled. Persistent. It suggests oversight. It suggests monitoring. And whether that oversight comes from a person, a system, or something else entirely, no one has been able to prove. The pine trees still surround the property like silent witnesses. The gravel driveway remains undisturbed. And every evening, when the sun slips below the horizon, whether the sky is clear or storm-filled, that upstairs hallway glows. Soft, steady, as if someone, somewhere, is still keeping track of the time. And the house, though empty for nearly a decade, refuses to be completely dark. Because whatever ended in 2016 left something behind. Not a body, not evidence, just a schedule. And sometimes, a schedule is harder to explain than a disappearance.